to develop, thanks to Susan and Chantal and Lori, whoever and Mindy, whoever put their eyes on it and gave feedback in its first iteration. That was done very quickly. But the other part of the R.E.A.C.T is, let's train people in the community, people that don't have professional experience and don't need professional experience. Let's train them quickly. And so after this call in the next few weeks, we'll invite some of you who have the prerequisites to train, and we'll still be within the realm of a month or two of its development. And then let's be able to respond to each other quickly. So when my PowerPoint goes down and I'm about to have a panic attack and Lisa gets on with her soothing voice, it immediately disarms me, and I know that I'm not in danger of losing my father's love, or being exposed on the Sahara with, without my core group or my tribe. I'm an animal in the jungle, waiting for a predator to pounce on me. So we need, if someone wakes up one morning and has just had enough, can't take what they're seeing on the news, or it's just one more day of not knowing what might happen, and they really just need that that relational source of comfort, or that relational source of support, that it can be requested and delivered or met quite quickly. So that's our hope. And like I've already said, this is all theoretical at this point. In the next few weeks and months as this rolls out, we will see through trial and error if this is possible, and we'll fine tune it, and we'll get as close to what we want or what we think we need as possible. The second one is that it's evidence-based. Evidence-based, we're drawing on, I mean, any therapist worth their weight in salt in the last 5 or 10 years knows that you must be trauma informed. We have just gone through an explosion and evolution in psychotherapy that has spent the end, or signified the end, of conventional talk therapy. You cannot just sit in front of your therapist for 25 sessions or 10 years and just talking about what happened to you in childhood, giving the news report and paying their mortgage all the meanwhile. That's just not going to fly anymore. And so through the work of some very pioneering people, Bessel van der Kolk and Stephen Porges and Dan Siegel, those are the three that we've drawn on for. There is very credible and sound evidence to talk about how trauma impacts the brain and the nervous system, and how it must be handled and dealt with in order for it to be an appropriate and viable treatment. And we're not talking about a psychotherapy here, we're talking about a protocol, but it is nevertheless still important that it be trauma informed, because it has to do with trauma. So we then combine the evidence-based body of material with the contemplative studies material. And so I've already mentioned, for those that are just joining us, that the CSP, Contemplative Studies Program, is based on the at least 1,000-year-old tradition of Tibetan Buddhism, a 2,500-year-old Buddhist mind sciences, but particularly the type of Buddhism that is called the universal vehicle, or Mahayana, which is best represented in the public eye through the Dalai Lama and his tradition and his espousing of compassion. And so what we use in this protocol, and which I will go into some detail as we can get through these next few slides, is an 8th century psychology from Buddhism that has to do with inversing self-absorption or self-exaggeration or self-enclosure, and reversing it for altruism. In other words, working with the evolutionary instincts and consciously overriding, or upgrading is probably better, upgrading evolutionary instincts so that we live from our most recent mammalian pro-social instincts rather than from our more reptilian instincts. Then there is the C, which stands for co-regulation, okay? And we wanted this to be simply about using one nervous system to link with another to help create an environment, an interpersonal environment for co-regulation. And then finally, technique. We talk about the fact that some our very senior colleagues have very advanced and sophisticated programs, such as Peter Levine's somatic experiencing program, these tend to be very lengthy and very in-depth, and usually only open to people who are very specialized and professional. And so we wanted this to be a technique that the public could learn. And Allison, I think it was, who mentioned her desire, she used this very apt statement. This sounds like CPR for emotions. So most people can go into a weekend workshop and get a CPR. And so, so you don't have to rely on EMS to arrive 15 minutes later. You can actually help someone who may be choking or someone who's not breathing. You may be able to rapidly respond to them with minimal training as someone in the public. That's your responsibility, your duty. So we were thinking more in that vein. So hopefully you guys are with me. How's the panel doing? So far,
beautiful. Yes, wonderful. Thank you.
Okay. So these, as I mentioned, are the theoretical frameworks that we are drawing on. The polyvagal theory of Stephen Porges is essential because it gives really the three levels of our survival strategy, or for our threat assessment and engagement strategy. And again, for the listener now, this is, in my estimation, this is must-have knowledge for everybody. To know and to navigate your own mind in this or another crisis, and to know and to navigate what might be happening in someone else's nervous system in this or another crisis is accessible. It is accessible with a little work and a little effort, a little bit of reading. We can understand the basics, and that suddenly helps us, or helps orient us to understanding what might be happening within us or outside of us. And the interpersonal neurobiology is a system of theory that comes from Dan Siegel. We draw on one element of it, although I love Dan Siegel's work, and it's very vast. He's a brilliant, revolutionary thinker, as is Porges. But there's one element that I think is useful for us, for our purposes. And then again, the contemplative science piece that comes from Shantideva in the 8th century, and particularly his psychology, what's called the 4-point exchange of self and other, and his methodology, or his meditation practice, which is called the give and take. So let's see what we have here. Okay, so imagine that through evolution, as we have developed, our species has developed, we have learned and adapted various ways of coping and facing threat and danger. And what polyvagal theory does, among other things, is articulate this hierarchy, what's called a phylogenetic scheme. Phylogenetic meaning that it has different phases that come from evolutionary periods, from the most common and the most ancient, all the way up to or primitive, all the way up to its most adaptive and most recent development. And so if we are starting with the most recent development, we are talking about the vagus nerve, which is is it the 8th or 10th cranial nerve? Any of you on the panel? At the base of the spine, a nerve that very much travels down the spine and to the region of the heart and the chest, also very much linked with the facial structures, the voice, the heart and lungs, and down into the gut, and of course all the and also feeding information from all the gut regions and organs. And they call this the smart vagus. Smart vagus meaning wandering. So it's like a smart wandering nerve that basically connects the higher cortical functionings with our gut and or wisdom intelligence and all the organs throughout. So this is a very, very important nerve. And it sends and receives and is a highway system for an awful lot of information. And the most adaptive and most recent part of it is called the ventral or smart vagus. Okay, and then in its mid-range and its primitive functions, it is increasingly lower. The lower you go, the more primitive it is. And if we just look at its coping function, what is celebrated as the achievement of evolution is our ability to connect with each other and to see faces and to register faces and to register calm faces and to recognize soothing vocal tone and to be reassured by those vocal tones, and not only to be reassured by them, but to listen for them. For example, mothers distinguishing between cries of an infant, which one signals danger, which one signals that a poo-poo is coming or a wee-wee is coming, and knowing the difference. And then, and so what that does is that part of our nervous system that registers and links and communicates is then able to co-regulate and also able to communicate. And once we can communicate, then we can problem solve and we can collaborate. And if there's a danger, this represents our best possible way to solve the threat danger, is to work together, to share our nervous system, one tribe, working together, sharing information amongst each other, making sure all members of the tribe or the community are on board and online, making sure each one of those units has their most optimal faculties available to them, and then sharing information within each other so that we can come up with a solution. That represents, in any situation of peril, threat, or danger, the best part of human evolution. But what is required for that is that we are emotionally resilient, buoyant, connected, and online. And so that those are all of those factors required are also leave this to be prone to disruption. And so when you get disrupted, when any of those factors get disrupted and you're not able to communicate, you're not able to collaborate, you're not able to problem solve, you're not able to keep your emotional resilience, you're not able to keep your regulation, your emotional regulation, you're not able to stay online, the nervous system has a profound capacity to find a lower order solution. And so that is the activation. And that's the one that most of us learned in college or in high school, called fight or flight. And we shouldn't be pejorative and demeaning of the fight or flight. Fight or flight, if you are in a school shooting, you better run. 10 minutes of adrenaline in a school shooting can mean the difference between life or death. And I'm not sure what the latest school shooting protocols is, but I highly doubt, unless you have a gun and you're going to kill the assailant, you're not really supposed to negotiate and talk with them. I'd have to double check that. Actually, my father-in-law is a crisis interventionist for school shootings and workplace violence. All of which to say our sympathetic activation, judiciously applied in short bursts, can be very meaningful and very profound in order to avert a threat. The problem is, again, as I said in a previous slide, is when that sympathetic activation, which is designed to be a short burst of mobilization to fend oneself off or flee, is prolonged. Then it starts to tax the nervous system. And so when that gives out, you fall down the hierarchy or down the ladder into the last resort. But again, I don't want to be pejorative here with the last resort. Thank God the last resort is there. So if you are immobilized by an assailant and you can't run and you can't fight, this could be in a physical abuse or sexual abuse situation, for example, when you're pinned down, or children, for example, that have to undergo a surgery and you can't quite coax a child to remain compliant. This survival strategy kicks in automatically. It's a default. It's not volitionally chosen. And what that does is it sends the signal to the brain to shut off and to immobilize and to absolutely freeze and then to dissociate. And so this is what people would subjectively describe as, I left my body. I was hovering outside of my body. I didn't feel a thing. Well, in a way, in the moment, that's a good thing. You'd have to agree, not to feel a thing in horrific circumstances. To be outside of one's body is going to keep one alive. But what we find in trauma therapy and trauma healing is that that experience then needs to be reintegrated. You have to come back to your body, and you have to eventually process that period of your life. In other words, you're not free to just move on, despite your best intentions. You're not free to move on. The past will follow you like a shadow until it is reclaimed by consciousness, by love. And so this slide basically shows the triumvirate of coping or adaptations, and the one that we want to focus on, or the one that you might find yourself, for example, if you find yourself in sympathetic activation, we want to help you move you to your higher cortical and higher evolutionary strategies. And if you're in dorsal vagal or immobilized, we want to move you into sympathetic activation. We want you to get mobilized. We want you to move. We want you to yell. We want you to scream. We want you to push back. That's better than being frozen. And then from sympathetic activation, then you can ascend in a way. This is polyvagal theory. Also, this vagus nerve very nicely maps the chakra system of the Buddhist and yogic sciences. We don't have time to go into that, but there is the word ascension is very key here, how energy ascends. We want us in the highest, most optimal, most buoyant, most communicative place in the nervous system. But if we find ourselves falling down the ladder, then at least know that and know what's happening. Okay, I'm going to leave this slide, but this is just, there are more than this, but these are some of the very identifiable practices that can keep your vagus nerve toned. And what that means is create that resilience. You know, in other words, what can you be doing every day as a training to keep yourself more resilient for when the next crisis happens, so that you can stay more buoyant, so that you can stay more in that pro-social place. Because it's not luck of the draw. Those people that have greater vagal tone have greater trauma resilience. And so how do they get there? Well, if you look at this, interestingly, if you look at this list of possibilities, the contemplative traditions and the spiritual traditions knew this. They just didn't know it through the language of science, but they knew that these were all important. And they prescribed them as a daily regiment. Moving along. So I'm going to run out of time here. I'm going to rush this a little bit here. Dan Siegel's methodology, one of the things that I really like is how Dan Siegel talks about a highway system that links brains called neural integration. Dan Siegel's not only talking about the integration that happens interpersonally, but interpsychically, but also interpersonally. So when I look at you and you look at me, and back all the way from when we were a baby, all the way to when we were adults, when I look at you and you look at me, there is an invisible highway system that connects our brains. And we are always relaying energy and information to each other. And depending on how open and receptive your highway system or your antenna is to the frequencies and messages of somebody else, that determines picking up the signal and signaling back that you have been heard and understood. So if we had alcoholic parents, or we had very depressed parents, or we had compromised parents, parents that had medical illnesses, parents that weren't emotionally available, parents that never processed their own trauma, parents that were shut down, if we went through an adoption, if we went through into childcare, we found parents that weren't available. That signaling and highway system has been dramatically interrupted. And so we may actually feel more anxious as a result of that, or less completely disconnected as a result of that. In other words, non-trusting as a result of all of that. But when it's working optimally, and certainly the direction that makes most sense to grow into is to have presence, then attunement. That means you're using concentration and awareness to then exit or to leave your nervous system, your subjectivity, and to link and attune like an antenna frequency. And like, just think about a radio. The antenna is always up. but you need the dial to tune into the frequency to catch the signal. So presence is your antenna. Attunement is your dial. Human to human, person to person. Resonance is picking up someone's signal. And not only just picking it up, but understanding it. It's in your language. We would call that empathy. So I'm with you. I see you. If it's in lockdown, I see you on a phone. I see you on a device. I stop my own mental chatter. I engage you. You feel engaged by me. You feel safe enough with me. You emit your signal to let me know how you're doing. I receive your signal. I resonate. I signal back to you if that's correct or not. If I'm not correct, we try again. We try until you feel heard, and then the circuitry is complete. Once the circuitry is complete, you have trust. We would need trust as a prerequisite to move forward in the protocol. So you'll find that this Dan Siegel's part is built into the protocol. Okay. Maybe someone can give me a signal in 5 minutes. Let me see if I can go through Shantideva's psychology from the 8th century in 5 minutes.
Yes, you can.
So just so that you know, Module 5 will eventually be made public as a single offer and for purchase. That would represent 16 hours. And then you could go through it more thoroughly. But essentially, this psychology tries to find the real culprit to our stress and trauma and to ameliorate it. And so the first premise is that we are all social creatures and we're all prone to distress. We all fall prey to social stress. And that means shame, blame, inequities, injustices, paranoias, people's aggression, people's hostility. We all have a nervous system that would respond in a similar way to that. We all share that. As we come into community and as we come into social interactions, we're not so much worried about food shortages, although that does exist in many parts of the planet. But the big social stress these days is how we're going to be received by others, and if we're going to be received by others. And so in that way, we are more similar than we are unalike. And so the first statement, equalize self and other, is to equalize self and other in this particular way by recognizing and appreciating how we all share a nervous system that is prone to the same kind of fears and doubts and repercussions of not being loved and not being received and feeling stressed because of our social interactions, our social viability. Things like worthlessness and microtrauma and powerlessness. These are the new horizon, the new symptomology of the new issues or terrains to explore in our social interactions. The second statement, the detriments of self-enclosure, is that there is you can look at external culprits, and we should, like systems of disenfranchisement, systems of shame, for example. But then each of us is also carrying an inner culprit, and the two actually mirror each other. But to assign the blame to any one would be only partial. And so sometimes the system is a really big one that might take a collaboration of people to address, whereas the one that's in our own heart, that's the one we can each address. And you have to do both. And the one that's in our heart has to do with this kind of reflex, a fight-flight reflex, that ascribes importance and centrality to this bit of real estate over that one. I'm more important. I'm the center of my own world, and I need to be protected. And I need to get whatever resources I need to satisfy my urges. And I don't have any real appreciation for consequences of that. I think that's just how I'm programmed. That's how everybody is programmed. And if you look at a planet of 8 billion people all operating under the premise of the self-enclosure instinct, you can see that we are not going to get very far. And in a way, that would be one way of understanding how we have driven ourselves to the brink of mass extinction. Because in a way, when there's only 1 million people on the planet, we have reached the limits, evolutionary speaking, of allowing this part of our being, which prioritizes over anything else, our own hedonic urges, for example, at the expense of others. So we could go through the list of detriments of self-enclosure, but suffice to say that's the inner, what we'd call in Buddhism, the inner terrorist. Each one of us has it. And unless that's exposed and uprooted, then we will be continually prone to what's called the samsara making machine, or the life of endless misery. The third point is the benefits of altruism, which is the inverse. Think about all the times where you naturally, or by way of reason, or by way of examination, or by way of spontaneity, relinquish that self-enclosure and actually cherish the other more than oneself. Probably most of your greatest, it's not your bucket list, but your top 5 joys in your life have to do with some sense where you overcame that and you really sensed another. You were generous, you were kind, you were patient, you rescued another, you helped another, you thought of another, and somehow exiting that myopia and entering into someone else's world was almost like a mini liberation. And then, of course, we are compelled by way of a gravitational force back into self-enclosure. And so what the contemplative traditions are doing in this latest iteration of Buddhism, the greater vehicle, is they're taking that as a prerequisite platform for furthering evolution, actually saying, we're not just going to let evolution dictate this. We're going to use consciousness as a crowbar to leverage greater levels of compassion and crowbar open that myopia and displace it with otherness, with we-ness, what Dan Siegel will say, transition from me to we. And that transition to me to we, the we includes you. It's not self-effacing of you, but it also recognizes you as just one part in a totality, and it broadens your horizon to be more inclusive of that totality in what the Dalai Lama will say, enlightened self-interest. If you're going to be selfish or self-interest, at least be a wise selfish or an enlightened self-interest, which means don't just think about yourself in the context of others and try to go for the greater good of all. Then the fourth one is how do you actually do that? You have to actually work with your nervous system. You have to train your nervous system, which is one of the major features of the contemplative movement, is that it's known to be a skills training. You can actually train yourself. Just as you train yourself to remain in high vagal tone, you can train yourself over a period of time to displace the orbit of self-enclosure with a more open-centric and other-centric and we-centric gravitational force or gravitational pull. How do you do that? Once you understand those 4 points of psychology, then you get to the actual methodology or the meditation called the give and take, Tonglen. So we borrowed from Tonglen in this protocol, and I should really move along. I'm feeling very pressured for time, excuse me. Let me just paint the picture of a give and take. Essentially what you're doing is that your normal habit, instinctual program is to run from people's distress and preserve your own integrity. And what we're trying to do is override evolution and train in one's capacity to face people's distress, increase our distress tolerance so that we have more reserve, almost in the way that immunity is gained by taking in a little bit of the sickness. rather than atrophy our ability to deal with people's distress, grow it. How do you grow your reserve, your capacity? You expose yourself to it. And we know this in therapy as exposure therapy. Expose yourself to the distress increases your capacity. But while you're doing that, you're also relinquishing your myopia, and you're also sharing from a sense of abundance your resource with people. So if you have care for a child while a child is having a tantrum or having a meltdown, or they come home from school, with your own child, you would get down on their level. You would open your nervous system. You would use presence, attention, resonance, and trust. You would get down on their level. You would attune to them. You would get feedback from them. You would empathize with them. But then you would share your nervous system with them. And because you're separate, and you're in a good space, you have something that they need that you can share. So you would take their stress burden and you would share your safety, you would share your resilience, you would share your attention, you would share your abundance. And this would be trained on the breath. It would be imagined on the breath. So while you inhale, you would imagine taking their distress. And while you exhale, you would imagine giving them your care. And what we're going to do when we work with people in the protocol is the provider is going to imagine sending care and taking distress, but they're also going to advise the receiver to say, are you ready to give? Are you ready to relinquish? Are you ready to allow me to support you in your moment of need? Are you going to allow me to unburden you so that you don't have to hold it all together? And are you going to allow yourself to receive my care? And this is actually a profound thing. We shouldn't assume that this is easy for any of us. I can tell you this, that when someone is kind to me, my instinct is to doubt their kindness. I have been burned so many times in my childhood that I don't believe people will sincerely wish to support me. They have some ulterior motive. They want something from me. And so what that has left me is feeling incredibly isolated. And what that looks like as an isolated person for most of my life is I will try to do things all by myself. And really the exercise of developing the contemplative studies program is I have had to rely on an amazing team. And I got to tell you, every single day where I ask for help or ask there for something, it is incredibly challenging for me. So if it took me 40 years to get here, I'm not expecting myself to unburden myself of the trauma of self-enclosure and of mistrust in one single session. But then how else am I ever going to grow and learn and develop and evolve? It's by actually allowing myself to be vulnerable, allowing myself to have my PowerPoint crash, allowing myself to ask Lisa for support, allowing myself to be an idiot online, allowing myself to not have my shit together and not have to overperform for my father's validation and to be a complete mess with you during the pandemic. How refreshing is that? And then we can all just be like crazy, wild, roller coaster riding children together. And then once we're past all that hubris, then we can really actually help one another one by one. You help me, I help you. Together, we are collectively reshaping our nervous system. Okay, this list just sort of outlines what I think are these features about give and take meditation that make it so actually, if you take it in context, I was going to say take it out of context, but we don't do that. We don't take the give and take meditation out of context. We value and appreciate it within its spiritual context. But let's look at this list. It's a very profound list. Psychologists out there should be really interested in this technique. Mindfulness has caught the world by storm, but imagine in 10 years, give and take meditation receives equal scientific investigation and validation, peer review, all the whole thing. It's quite profound what it offers. I'll let you revisit this slide. And here we are. What's our time frame, guys? Okay, I have 10 minutes to go through the protocol, and then we'll actually see the protocol. So are we in good shape, roughly? If we buy a little more time on the other end because of my mishap? So good? So far, so good? Can I hear someone's voice just so I don't feel like I'm in a fishbowl?
We're good.
That's
Oh,
good.
human voice out there. Let me hear that.
I'm doing good.
We're just right.
We're just right. Okay,
Just
see all
right.
that validation and reassurance? It
Just
just
enough wisdom.
primes my brain. It motivates me to complete this on time. I'm with you. You're with me. I hope everybody listening, wherever you might be, past, present, or future, local, non-local, three-dimensional, virtual. I hope you're all enjoying this. Okay. So the Connect protocol, and we have a training manual for those that are going to move into the preparations of the training, the actual training. We have a training manual and a cheat sheet for you. But what I'm going to present is just to the open public so that those that are curious and wondering how it works, these are the salient elements. It has 5 different elements. And we wanted it to be fairly succinct, but even, I guess, it's relative what succinct is. Contact, connect, communicate, co-regulate, and coordinate. Okay, so we are thinking that this is going to happen over some sort of device because this developed out of lockdown, and it may one day not be. It may be that you do this in person. It would be equally capable of doing it in person as online. So someone in the community says, I could really use a tandem meditation. I would really like a tandem meditation. I would really like to be reacted to. So they get on a list and someone calls them within a day, and their phone number comes up, their face pops up, and you establish eye contact. This is the wrong slide. Here we are. You establish 3 things at the outset. Before you, as a provider and a receiver, as the provider, before you even get on the call, you ground yourself. Whatever that means for you, take a few deep breaths, refresh what the protocol is for you. You do whatever you need to do to become a vessel or a vehicle. I mean, if you have a tantric practice and you want to do a visualization, you are free to add any kinds of personalized, customized elements to this. Then you get on the phone with them and you see them and you establish a frame. A frame is a common terminology that comes out of psychotherapy, which is the kind of implicit or explicit contract that you have between each other. Like, what is the purpose? Well, this is what we're going to do together. We're not going to have a lengthy conversation. I'm not calling you to have a chat. I'm calling you so that we can do this tandem meditation. And this tandem meditation is not going to be an hour. It's not going to be an hour and a half. It's going to be 20 to 25 minutes. So what you're basically doing is managing the expectations so that it's clear, like what we're doing. And then I've been thinking about this. You only have to really do that once, or you only have to establish the frame once. And so it may take a little longer the first time, but if you get a REACT call from somebody the second time, they know what to expect. And you've already done it once with them, or you've done it with somebody else. And so you can just say, you've already done this? Great. So that you know what we're going to do. And you can glide right through that stage. And then the third thing is that it's really important for the provider to really assess the situation of somebody. It may be more distress or more threat than this protocol is really designed for, in which case you might have to actually refer them. You might just say, oh, like you're in a domestic violence situation, this is not really appropriate. And some of the faculty here will help you determine what's actually appropriate or not. But we're going to say somewhere along the lines of moderate distress, but they're actually safe in their house. Okay, and you have to kind of assess that fairly quickly. Or if you're a receiver and you've already been through that, you can just tell the provider, I'm actually good. I just really need, the 20 minutes. I would really like the 20 minutes. And then of course it's important to just, there will be a small little window of verbiage and dialogue here in this, there will be a moment of conversation just to create the attunement. And in that time, if there's anything that revealed that might be troublesome or worrisome to a provider who is mandated, for example, it's important that you raise that with somebody up front, like the things that the things that you might say to me unknowingly, they could have consequences where I might have to actually call to get some help or an intervention, a greater intervention. So people should know that. So that's the contact phase. So it looks like the slide where you said contact twice. So that's contact, and this should be connect. This should be connect. So we'll have Lainey change this slide. 2 should be connect, right? Contact, connect. Yeah. Okay. So will someone just make a note of that so we can change the slide? That's another part of this. Everybody who's got eyes on this, if you see mistakes or those that go through the training have comments and revisions and upgrades, that's part of what we really want to do with this. So you get on the phone, you're seeing face to face, you've explained and communicated what the purpose is, and that's all in agreement. There's no threat, and you're ready to proceed, and you're really linking eyes now. Think both in terms of Porges's model of the smart vagus, think also in terms of Dan Siegel's model of the highway system. You're establishing that highway system right now. And the way that you deliver as a provider, the kind of vocal intonation, which is why it's important for you to take a few deep breaths and to ground yourself before you start. You're connecting brains. Your face matters. Your eyes matter. Your voice matters. These are seemingly intangibles, but to the what Porges calls neuroception, they're everything. They are what intuitively disarm people. A voice, facial recognition, clear cues and directive, nice voice and open eyes, good posture. Here we go. Third phase, communicate. This is where you're actually going to use a little language. Now be careful. A lot of people on the phone like to talk. You give them a phone and you open that window and they're going to go for it. And some people don't like to talk, and they may be more, thinking that they just want to do a meditation. They don't really want to communicate, but actually, for both, you have to find this middle ground to get just enough information so that you understand where they're coming from or what their reason is for asking for support, what their feeling is. And more than that, you want to be able to register in their mind through the signaling that they feel understood. That's what's going to bring you into greater alliance and greater resonance. So you have actually in this stage, through this discussion, you have 2 objectives. Find out what's going on for them as cogently and as quickly and as precisely as you can, and relay back to them that you have understood until they affirm. I've been feeling really upset, or I'll take the example I start out with, like the last few days with George Floyd. I've been very, very numb. I have felt really, really down. I have almost tipped into that despairing place. And so if I asked Susan to get on the line with me, she might say, "Well, how are you doing? What's going on?" I would say just that. I would just say, I'm feeling really, really low right now. I feel myself numb. I feel disconnected. I can feel a lot of lethargy. And then she would say back to me,
Wow, it sounds like you're feeling really dysregulated and low, and things have been really hard for you lately.
That part right there, things have been really hard for me. I instantly, when she said that, I said, yes. I never said that with my words, if you noticed. So when she said that extra bit of information that she processed and understood, using that word back to me, told me, boom, she's got it. If she had just parroted off what I said, my little suspicious mind would have gone, oh, she's just parroting off what I said. But because our relay mind system is going, and I tell her how I'm subjectively feeling, she processes it. Then she uses empathy. She used the first words, which felt a little mechanical. Then the second word, and then she heard the third word. She said, "You're having a really hard time." Was it? What was it you actually used?
Yeah, you're having a really hard time with this.
Really hard time. Then emotionally, I felt it, and the minute I felt it in my body, boom, we're connected. That's a great in vivo example. So now we are aligned. But the second thing that the provider has to do, and may ask a few more questions to really get to the second objective, is you want to know what their arousal state is, because that's going to determine how you work with them. And that's really the heart of the protocol, is it's all based on arousal. If you learn nothing else from this time together, the point of R.E.A.C.T is to work with our arousal system and to regulate our arousal system. So we have to know what we're working with. And if you look at everything on a spectrum, you have high arousal and you have low arousal. And the point is to try to get someone to middle way, and not just to hang out there and have a cigar and a pina colada on the beach, but you want them to get middle way so that they can ascend to their higher cortical functioning, and both of you can work together to try to find a solution or to try to work forward, even with a long-term strategy. So you're making mental note of where they were, and I'm sure Susan recognized in what she said that I was down. So she's thinking, okay, I'm in the down pathway. So you can imagine that there are two strategies. There's working with the high arousal and bringing them more middle, or working with the low arousal and bringing them more middle. And you're making a mental note of that. So here is the fourth sequence, part of the sequence, the co-regulate. And the co-regulate takes the information from the preceding sequence and determines the pathway forward. So you're going to do two things. Not only you're going to try to go middle, but then you're going to then do the give and take. So that's what we're doing in this sequence. You're balancing which extreme of arousal or shutdown, high arousal or shutdown, bringing it to middle. Then you're going to give and take, tandem meditation. So if you're in high arousal, depending what level of high arousal, and this came up from Lorraine, one of our yoga teachers, long-standing yoga teachers, 30 plus years of yoga. I can't remember the context of one of her questions recently, but it had to do with arousal. And she's like, it's just too intellectual. When I'm highly aroused, I need to move. I need to move. And that got me thinking about when someone's really up and you're in that restless, high arousal state. If it's really high aroused, not much. It's going to be a little irritating to have someone say, well, now we're going to ground you in the body. And if you just look at things in terms of energy and what that energy in evolutionary context is designed to do, if an animal is being chased by a predator, it has a big thrust of energy, it gets out of the way, and then it down regulates. So if you have an assailant or you have an invisible culprit and you're highly aroused and you're restless and you're tipping in anger, what I'm suggesting is you determine whether you need a discharge. And I actually borrowed from martial arts, where you could take 10 breaths and you discharge the energy. Discharge, 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 discharge. And you can even use hand gestures. So I suggest 10 breaths, and I suggest you sound out ha, 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 ha. And you do it really viscerally. And you don't care if you look like an idiot. You don't care about looking like an idiot. You think about like releasing this energy, like spending it, expending it. And if you want to use visuals or whatever, you can use visualization, whatever you need. Ha, ha, ha. You can use 10 of those. And then you can transition into the sequence called grounding body scan. And that will help spend the energy and then help you come more centered. And the grounding body scan is very ubiquitous. People have known since John Kabat-Zinn's mindful body scan for over 25 years how to do it. You work with your co-regulator to bring your awareness to your crown and through each body region, so that you become you become aware of your body and you start to relax your body. So you use the breath, you go face, the provider says, can you bring your awareness to your crown? Do you feel it? And you don't just say yes, you first feel it. Then you breathe and you relax the face. and the crown, then the throat. Do you feel it in the throat? Yes. Then she says, do you feel it in your chest? Yes. And she says, you feel it in your abdomen, and you go down the whole sequence, and then you flip it from the toes and you go all the way up. And it's possible the second time round, you can just let them do it. And maybe you develop a nice rapport and you don't have to participate like each step. You can just let them do it. Maybe they're there and you're with them and you're breathing with them. And as they return from the toes to the crown, they are going through each region, becoming embodied in the present moment, breathing until they return to the crown. So that would be the pathway for high arousal. If you determine that you have low arousal, which would have been my case in my scenario, I'm feeling dissociative, I'm feeling disconnected, I'm feeling numb. So then you ask somebody to open their eyes in the present moment and to engage their immediate environment. Because what's happening with disconnection is that you're floating away. And I call this the time machine effect. You may be in another time, you may be in a surreal time zone, somewhere else, floating above in your thoughts, past and present. So we want you here in the moment, especially if we've determined that here in the moment is safe enough. Like you're in your home, your partner's in the other room, you're on the phone with me, this is a safe place. We've already determined that. Let's bring your awareness back here. Can you tell me what you're seeing right now? Well, I see the sunlight hitting the buildings across, through the window, the sunlight hitting the building across the street. And then you say, and then the provider says, so you see the building across the street. What else do you see? Well, I see some plants on the windowsill, different kinds of plants, different kinds of colors. And then she might say, can you tell me what colors that you see or what kind of textures you see? And so the provider is working with the recipient to elicit information that requires them or invites them into connecting their senses and grounding their senses in the present moment. So you're bringing that awareness from its ethereal, ghost-like, phantom-like disconnect, and you're using the present moment and particularly senses to serve as an anchor to bring you back home. And it doesn't necessarily have to be visual cues. It can be smells. It can be sounds. Can you tell me what you hear outside? Well, I hear the sprinkler outside and the birds. How many birds? Maybe you go 2 or 3 levels deep, and with each level of inquiry, you're bringing forward attention into the present moment. And then at the tail end of that, if it's necessary, you can ask somebody to go through, and it may sound very weird, but you can ask them a more linear question like, what day is it and what time is it? And you might even ask them a math question or a math problem, or to count backwards. And these are all devices that bring the left brain online. They require you to do some cognitive thinking or processing. And so that would be at the tail end, just as a marker to determine that you've actually come back from your ethereal, dissociated, numb, right brain experience back into the body and online enough to access the left brain so that you could be logical and linear. And if they can't tell you what 74 minus 3 is, then you keep prompting them for what's in the immediate environment. What's under there? What's the cushion feel like? Sights, sounds, tastes, touches, and smells. Those are the things that you want to work with. Okay. Then, whether you do the pathway 1 from down regulating from high arousal using discharge and grounding, or just grounding, depending on how aroused they are, or you're coming from pathway 2 from low arousal to being online using mindfulness of external stimuli, then you begin a one or two sequences of tandem breath work. As I described before, you're going to say to this person, are you ready to do breath work now? Yes, I'm ready to do breath work. Okay, we're going to both inhale and exhale roughly around the same time. And as you inhale, I want you to imagine receiving my care and my attention. And as you exhale, I want you to imagine giving up, unburdening yourself of this distress. And I want you to feel that I'm really taking it from you. Are you ready for that? Yes, I'm ready for that. So then you do, and you also tell them, I'll count for you. Don't worry. Just breathe and imagine yourself letting go. Imagine yourself letting go. Imagine yourself receiving. Imagine yourself letting go. Meanwhile, the provider is saying, I'm prepared to take on this burden and I'm prepared to give away some of my care. And there are several layers of this sequence that correspond to the actual giving and taking meditation from the Tibetan tradition that have a visualized component that the provider can add if they are so inclined. You can do the clear light on the exhale and the dark smoke on the inhale. You can do the totem of the jewel tree behind you, visualizing that you're not just there alone giving and taking, but you're there with the entire lineage or some sort of shamanic totem, or you're there with Christ and Mary, or you're there with the Buddha, or you're there with whomever it is that represents your highest ideal. You can, as the provider, imagine that you're in a room with them and that you're actually the nexus of a figure eight. In other words, they're sending light to you and you're like just the vehicle, and that light is coming out of you, and then the recipient is receiving it, and then they're sending waves of black smoke to you, and you're just a recycling factory, and then it goes through you and the lineage is receiving it. They have your back. And if you want to go one step further, then you go tantric, you would just imagine that the indestructible drop at your heart chakra is when the black smoke comes, it's getting lanced or pierced. And what that does is it opens a small opening that emits a huge amount of fusion or nuclear fusion light. And that's where you disrupt your self-enclosure and replace it with inclusivity. Okay, I think we're just about there, guys. So this is a great slide. Please read this slide on your own. It basically shows you what the provider gets out of the deal. It's a good deal both ways. What the receiver gets out of the deal. And then also remember that a provider is always a receiver at some point. It's very, very good so that we don't get caught up in this kind of roles. It's a very fluid role and there's no sort of hierarchies and whatever, that the receiver becomes a provider and the provider becomes a receiver. Possibly. Okay. Then there's an action step. Maybe I'll just say one line and I'll let Susan and Chantal act this out, and so that you get a mock display of it. But after you've done your co-regulation, then it's important that you just have a little transition in which you sort of assess how that person is and what you can do together to empower or to galvanize that integration that the receiver has now established, so that they don't, once you hang up, they don't just fall back into something. They actually have a cogent action plan that carries them through the day. Things that they can be doing to keep them more buoyant in the next 6 hours or whatever. And you can also ask if they would like another call the next day. Okay, so let me end there. I hope that some of you are still with me. And there are the list of all the people I want to honor who provided feedback to get us to where we are right now. And with that, I will cancel out of the slide. The slide presentation is in PDF form for those of you on the call who won't go any further but would like more information. And now let's invite Chantal and Susan to role play, and then please stay for the final little bit for Lori to explain how we transit, and for question and answer, and for Lori to explain how the training will proceed. Thanks very much.
Great.
Thank you, Miles.
Thank you so much. I'm pinning Chantal to my screen so I can focus on her.
Okay, so like this, I just want to do this quick disclaimer. We are doing a mock run of this for educational purposes, but I am going to try to tap into that anxious part of myself, which shouldn't be too hard. So just a fair trigger warning if any of the things that I discuss with Susan, hit you in a certain way, please do feel free to reach out to one of us, and we can certainly debrief about that. So that's your trigger warning disclaimer before we get started. So I'm not a great actress, but I'm gonna go ahead and see if I can tap into some anxiety for you.
Great. Hey, Chantal, I'm so glad you reached out. Thank you so much for reaching out. Just before we start, we're going to do this together. We're going to co-regulate our nervous systems. Do you have about 15, 20 minutes, just uninterrupted, so we can tap into each other?
Yeah, I was able to move into a quiet room, so I have a little bit of private space, so I shouldn't be interrupted. I do have a son, so hopefully he doesn't run in here. But yeah, thank you for holding this space for me.
Oh, my pleasure. Do you have a blanket or something nearby? Sometimes it's nice to have some kind of comfort, some kind of feeling of safety. If you don't, that's fine too, but if you have something, that's a nice thing to put around your feet. You do great. Put that around your weight. Good. All right, so let's just start. Tell me what you've been experiencing a little bit lately. Tell me how you're feeling it in your body.
Well, I've just been really, really amped up lately. Overwhelmed, stressed out, having a hard time concentrate. With being stuck at home for all this time, I really don't have any kind of, work-life balance. And I got into a really bad argument with my brother the other day, which triggered a lot of stuff from our childhood. And then on top of that, I've been trying to keep up with the Ahmaud Arbery case, and then the George Floyd case happened. And, I've experienced racism and homophobia, and it's been a lot of triggers. And I feel like I can't get on the news. I can't.
Chantal, while we're talking, I just want to remind you to let's keep looking at each other. I want to hear everything you're saying, but I want you also to really be able to focus on me. Okay. So let's really stay present together.
Thank you. Yeah.
All right. So let me just give you a little bit back. So what I heard you say so far is that you've just been really feeling piled upon. Stuff from your childhood, stuff from the news. I mean, the systemic oppression and racism, all of it's just coming down and it's hitting you right now really hard.
Right. I feel very overwhelmed. I feel just really tender-hearted, just like an open nerve, frustrated with myself, angry, stressed. Yeah. So just feeling really anxious, Susan. So.
Right. So in your body, where do you feel that mostly right now? I mean, you said you're feeling stressed and anxious. Where do you feel that?
I feel it in, my shoulders. I kind of, sometimes I describe my anxiety as it's like an open nerve. I just feel like just shaky, just all over. And it's just really hard to know what to do with all of that sometimes.
Right. Well, before we move on, maybe we have a lot of extra energy circulating around. Maybe we can engage in kind of a release, to kind of release some of that tension, like a discharge. So we can do that. We'll look at each other. We'll focus on it. So we can do that with breath. We can use our breath and use the syllable ha, like they do in martial arts. And you can even move your body if you feel like you need to, right? You can use, like you're holding onto something hot and you're letting it go. So you can use your hands or your arms, whatever you feel you need to do to kind of release some of that extra, discharge some of that extra energy. How's that sound?
Yeah, we can try that.
We'll do it together. Even if it looks silly, it doesn't matter. We'll just do it together. It's okay. We don't care if it's silly. Okay? Okay. Yeah. So take a deep breath and let's just go. Ha.
Ha.
Great. Ha.
Ha. Ha. Ha.
Ha.
Ha. Ha.
Ha.
Ha. Ha. Ha. Ha.
Good. Good. Keep breathing. How's that feel?
A little dizzying.
A little dizzy. Me too. Me too. Okay, let's just ground ourselves and take a breath. Good. Yeah. Keep focusing on me if you can. Let's try to keep connecting and like returning to each other. Good. Right. You ready to move on and maybe do some, tandem breathing and kind of continue to feel this?
Yeah, I would appreciate that. Yeah.
Okay, good. So get really settled. Feel yourself in your chair, right? Just feel it supporting you. Okay. So get really comfy. We'll just do like your typical body scan. Okay. We'll start at the top of your head. And as I name a particular region, you just acknowledge, just verbally, let me know that you're able to focus in, just really attune to yourself with presence, not judging anything that you're feeling, just allowing any sensation to arise. And you're just going to attune to that sensation with, presence and warmth. Okay.
Okay.
Okay. So you let me know as we go through. Okay. Let's
Okay.
start at the top of our heads. Keep breathing. Keep focusing with me. So we'll start at the top of your head. Let's focus in on the muscles in your forehead, around your eyes, relaxing as we go, the muscles in your jaw, back of your head. Yeah, if you have to make little adjustments, go right ahead. Are you present in your head and your jaw?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's move to your throat and your neck. Bring your attention. Feeling whatever comes up. Are you with me? There?
Yeah.
Great. So down to our shoulders. Relaxing your shoulders, let them fall. There you go.
A little louder, Susan.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, just let your shoulders fall. Very good. Just allow the muscles to relax. Place your attention in your shoulders. Are you there?
Yes.
Good. Okay, we're going to move down to your chest. Feel yourself breathing. You might want to place your hand over your heart. That feels good. Great. Terrific. You there?
Yeah.
All right, let's move to our attention down our arms, down to your elbows, down to your wrists and hands. Just relaxing as you go. There?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Let's move back to our back, your upper back, the muscles in between your shoulder blades, down your mid back. Good. Move to our abdomen. You can feel your belly rising and falling, relaxing the muscles as you breathe.
You guys want to flash forward to the tandem work now, just in the interest of time?
Sure. Okay. So you're feeling grounded right now? Feeling it in your
Yes.
body? Okay. So are you ready to, right? So what we're going to do, we're going to work together as a team. Okay. We're going to synchronize our breath. We're going to really focus on breathing slowly and deeply, and we're going to do it as synchronized as possible. Okay. So as you're breathing out, I want you to try to imagine you're breathing out all this tension and all this stress and all the anxiety, and give yourself the permission to let it go. Okay. And you're going to give it to me. And then I'm going to recycle it, and I'm going to give you back all the calming presence that you need. Okay.
Okay.
Okay, great. Okay, so as you breathe in, I'm going to keep track. Don't worry about the timing. Okay, I'm going to focus on our breath. And when we get to number 9, we'll do it 10 times. When we
Okay.
get to 9, I'll let you know, and we'll do the last one together. Okay.
Okay.
All right, great. Okay. Oh, the other thing we could do if you want, as we're breathing, we can do kind of a silent affirmation. So maybe as we're breathing in, we can think together. And on the exhale, we can think, I'm safe. How does that
Okay.
feel for you?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'd like to try that. Yeah. Mhm.
All right, let's breathe in. Exhale. All right, we'll do one more time together. So how are you feeling in your body right now?
I feel a lot lighter. I feel a lot more relaxed. Yeah. A lot lighter.
Great. So
Not as tight.
So glad. So why don't we talk about a way we can sustain this? All right, let's come up with an action plan so that over the next few hours, you can maintain this sense of centeredness and moving forward. Okay. What are some things that you can do to kind of help this sensation sink in?
This body scan was really helpful. That was very soothing to go up and down some of my stressful tight parts of my body to feel it relax.
Okay.
That's something I can do later today.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
If you're feeling really anxious and nervous, some of the things we can use to tonify our vagus nerve is to put cold water on your face.
Yeah.
Even laying down on the floor, putting your feet up against the wall. That's a really nice, relaxed, inverted, pose that you can just settle into the floor. That's another thing.
Yeah.
So doing the body scan, right? Reaching out to other people. Would you like a call from me again tomorrow or someone else from the CSP to check in with you to see how you're doing tomorrow?
I would. It's hard sometimes when I'm a social worker, I'm a meditator, but I get overwhelmed, and sometimes it's just the doing of the self-care, the pressure. Sometimes it can be hard. So having somebody call me and kind of check in with this action plan and that accountability piece, I would appreciate that if possible.
We're all doing it. We're all in this together. It's like up and down. We're all just, some days we're up, some days we're down. And so we just give and take for each other. And that's what this is all about. Okay?
I appreciate that. So I appreciate it. It's a nice safe space. So I appreciate you seeing me in this moment. Yeah.
Thank you. It was wonderful. Really, it was a wonderful exchange. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Susan.
You're welcome. Thank you. Back to you, Miles. And see.
Okay, that was great little sample, and thank you too for working that out. And I think we're over time, so I appreciate you being flexible and just sort of jumping ahead to just save a little time there. And any of you guys on the panel have any questions, follow-ups, or comments? And we can then, as we're just eliciting comments from you guys too, if anybody who's on the call wants to ask a question, then feel free to put that in the chat box, the question answer box. And anybody on the panel?
Yes, please. It's Lisa. My question is, do you have an established assessment questionnaire for someone you're working with for the first time to know if this is within the skill set of the peer-to-peer, gathering?
For the participants in the training?
Yes. Is there an assessment questionnaire to know whether or not
they're appropriate?
Right.
No, what we're using as a criteria is the two prerequisites are that they've done module 2, which is our trauma-informed module, about 16 hours of education, and The second one is module 5, which is on the give and take, the practice. And then what will happen is they're going to work with the supervise, like a kind of a supervision. So that will serve as any kind of screen opportunity. One of the panelists will be able to assess with them what might have come up, and if there are any red flags that might come up then. But certainly, I think it's probably a good idea to think about it. And so I'm sure everybody on the panel has noted some sort of device up front could be useful. So thank you for raising that.
Thank you.
Anyone
Annette
else?
Well, Annette put in a good question about how would you do it if you weren't going to see somebody face to face, if you're just going to be over a phone. And I just think you just need to check in more and like asking, like I could see Chantal breathing. So I was able to check in with her. So if you don't have that visual, I would just say, so are you still with me? Are we breathing? It's a lot more verbal confirmation that you're on the same page. You could do it. It is definitely challenging, but you could do it.
Maybe though it shouldn't be optional if it's just like a shyness thing, because those cues are really, really important. But if it's a technology thing and you don't have a webcam or something like that, or you don't have an internet broadband connection, but I'd strongly encourage, if at all possible, to have that visual cue. Okay, well, if nothing further, then I hope this is, for me, this is a good start. Again, I want to just remind everybody that that worked on this, and then everybody that will sort of sign on to take it to its next iteration, that this is, the first, this is the initial phase, so I think just even at Lisa's inquiry about an assessment, I think things like that will happen in the next month or two. And so what we end up with on the other side of this could be pared down. It could definitely be made better, and we'll actually see if it actually works. And what I'd like to do is ask people from the CSP, particularly who have both module 2 and module 5, and an interest in being a recipient and a provider 3 times in a mock 15 to 20 minute exercise. That will screen out initially anybody who's nervous and wants to just be a voyeur and just peer in. We're not going to have that. If you want to, see how this goes and be involved in the first iteration, give feedback and see if this is viable and see if we can get it to a viable thing, then you have to commit to at least giving and receiving at least 3 times, and then being part of a debrief with one of the panelists, so that we can receive your feedback and troubleshoot and fine tune as we go forward. And so Lori's been very instrumental in creating the sort of way that virtually online we'll be able to go to the next phase and give you guys the training manual and the cheat sheet. Lainey and I have worked together to have a more extensive training manual to bring you into a deeper appreciation for all the sequences, but then a one sheet that synthesizes and reduces the entire protocol into one cheat sheet for those of us that like those kinds of things. And she'll work with you to give you that package and to tell you how to sign up for a dyad, so that you're going to be working with somebody. It might not be the same person every single time, but you'll be working with somebody, whatever time zone you might be in, whatever schedule you might have. Hopefully, and that's a big ask of Lori to help us with that. Some of it will be done with Google Docs and some other ways of doing it. But that will give us a phase where everybody who wants to participate in the next phase will have be on the receiving end 3 times and on the giving end 3 times, and then be in one supervision group with one of the panelists where we can get that feedback, and then we will see where it goes from there. Lisa, I wanted to ask you what's your sense of the scalability here, and any sort of from your perspective, working with government agencies, what are you seeing?
Yes, I think this is a beautiful beginning of a scalable protocol. Absolutely. And I encourage everyone who is drawn to this to get involved, because we're going to need a lot of peer-to-peer support as we go forward in this wave and potential other waves going out from here. So yes, I think it's great. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Okay, Lori, I'll turn it over to you, and we're about 15 minutes over, so I want to just extend my appreciation for everybody that participated, stayed with online. Looks like we have 50 participants, and whomever else joined us virtually, thank you so much on YouTube, and whoever sees this in the future, thank you so much. So Lori, please let us know what the next step is for the participants.
Sure. Okay, thank you. So for those of you who, as Miles said, meet the requirements in terms of participation in CSP and have participated in the trauma module, Allison will be sending out an email link with your contact information, in which you will just express your interests. I think it's like 4 or 5 questions, really simple. Part of that then also includes a drop-down box. I've scheduled 5 sessions over the next 10 days. They're like 1.5 hour blocks. We may need all of it, we might not need all of it, but you will be able to indicate your interest and a time slot that works for you, for us to get together again virtually to go over the manual, which you would have received at that point, review process, and just answer any questions that you have. And then again, as Miles mentioned, we are asking that everybody complete 3 sessions of co-regulation. And I'll be working on that matching. So people will talk about their availability through a form on the site, and matching you to somebody that actually could also benefit, who's at that time wants to be the receiver rather than the provider. We know that there will be a process around a debrief after each session, and a form to sort of complete, which is really just, again, short, brief, kind of a clinical debrief, with support all along the way. So I've made myself available for people if you're participating in a co-regulation as the provider and either you feel triggered or something comes up that you want to share prior to that supervision session, that you have someone to sort of work that through with. So again, that final step, as we know now, will be a supervision session with the members of the panel, done in small groups to get your feedback, review things that came up, and to talk about the process going forward. Okay.
Okay, that's a wrap, guys. Thank you so much to Allison for all her efforts to create every single event that we do, and all her thoughtfulness, coordinating and manifesting. Thank you, Allison. And then to the panel, thank you, Susan and Chantel, for your demo, and for Lori for all that you contributed. Also Mindy and Lainey for each of their efforts. And my new friend, Lisa, thank you for joining us spontaneously through the ether. No coincidences from a Dharma perspective. And thank you everybody who went over with us, whether you're live or in the future. Let's plant a seed together with our collective efforts that this could be something that actually benefits sentient beings in whatever crisis or difficulty they might find themselves. And with that, let everybody go enjoy the rest of their Sunday. Thank you so much once again, guys. Be well.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
That's all, folks. Take care.
On my